So now we come to the last event of the day before lunch. So we are at a point to describe our own experience, and of course Professor Jeremy Goh, who is the founding co-director of CCIR at SKBI, who has single-handedly brought relevant research in corporate governance in SMU and the expertise in construction of the SCGI. So Jeremy, Professor Goh, it's all yours. Thank you.
Well, Tom did my talk. All I need to do is to substitute Singapore and plug into Thailand, and I'm done. Then we can all go to lunch. Since there are students in this class, I'm going to go and do a little bit of academic setup as to why we are doing this. Okay. If we look back at the corporation, we started out as a mom and pop company. A blacksmith trying to fix the hoof on the horse, turning it into a shop. And finally, with the Industrial Revolution, one of the things, the great invention of our time is really the corporation, the separation of ownership and management. Right? Sounds like a pretty good idea, right? Somebody put up the money and other people run it. Okay? Then one day, somebody asked the question, what if they take our money and just run away? Okay? Because now it's a separation of ownership and management. Right? So how do you prevent, or put in the system where the managers who's managing the firm on behalf of the shareholders? If it's my grandfather's, tire repair shop at Orchard Road, then it's fine. He put up the money, he runs the show, he keeps the profit, right? But if his friend put up the money and my grandfather runs the show, then it becomes a separate matter, right? There's a separation of ownership and control. Okay? So with this separation comes a lot of conflict of interest. Okay? And we have here corporate scandals like Enron, right? And recently Satyam, and China Aviation Oil, and things like this. So corporate scandal gets the attention of people, and suddenly corporate governance moves to the forefront again. How can we prevent this from happening? Okay, right? More regulations? Nah. Okay. See what happened when a public outcry in the U.S. Congressman takes the stage, pounding table. We can't let it happen again. All right. Okay. Let's put in regulations. Okay. More compliance. Okay. Up the standards a little bit. But unfortunately, it's a double-edged sword. It makes compliance costs so expensive that most firms put up their hand and say, we're not going to do this. Right? It's just too difficult. Okay. So what's the consequences? Firms can't tap the capital from the capital market to expand their business. So in that sense, we say, some of us say, well, SOX could have effectively, stifled innovation. Not that, it just killed innovation. People are still innovating. Unfortunately, you can't tap the capital market. And you got this great idea, okay? This iPad that you're thinking about, but you can't get the funding. What's the use, right? You have an engineering school, very bright young people. You have incubators with ideas, but you can't get funding. And that's the rub, right? So, governance is a very important issue. Once you have this separation of ownership and management, then you have to worry about things like this. Right? You want to have checks and balances, right? But you don't want to have too overwhelming rules and regulations that people just have to file papers after papers. You need to have a massive legal department, right? And you have to buy, liability insurance, okay, things like that. Okay, so come back to Singapore. This project started years ago when I was when I came back to Singapore in 2001 to join this university that started back in 2000. And this governance idea was always at the back of my mind. How do we go about doing it? And one day I was having lunch with Tom's co-author, Piman, in Thailand. And we sat down and we talked about, said, well, is there a way, anybody doing this? They said, yeah, I'm doing this. I'm actually trying to measure all this stuff. I said, great, And so how do you go about doing it? So he said, well, like Tom talked about funding. World Bank put up the money, But there was a crisis, right? So out of crisis, good things happen sometimes, right? But in Singapore, there's no crisis. So how am I going to pull this off? I'm kind of can't raise the flag and say, oh, we need to come up with a measure. I'm going to measure. Because remember, when you go through an exercise of collecting data, putting together a depository of database, it's very time consuming and it's very expensive. Okay? Right? But fortunately, I wear the other hat that I'm the coordinator of a graduate program, by research program. So I made it a class exercise. I made a class exercise back in 2006. That's how my students here who have been here long enough are smiling. That we say, okay, let's have a project and let's do a pilot study and see what happens. Okay? And collected the data. I think that was back in 2008. So it took so many years of actually planning on how to do this. Right? So I'll share with you some of the ideas as to why this whole corporate governance index came about and the need to do it in Singapore. Now, Tom talked about starting with something. And this idea basically started here because, Pima and myself, we sat down in a coffee bean in Thailand, sipping latte and said that, how nice if we can build something that we can measure across Asia with the same principle. Okay? So we start, oh, we're already doing this, Hong Kong, and say, well, let me join the fund and let us do this. Yeah. But more important than just doing as a research paper, where we collect some data. When you're doing research, you always talk about, you worry about cost and benefit, because remember, you have to collect a lot of data. And normally when we do research, we collect one time, we write a paper, and that's it. But here, the goal is more important because we want to have a depository of databases, and we want the database to stay here. So in the future, whether graduate students, some of you guys are working on papers, I know, or researcher, or even industry participant like SIAS, out there who needs data, like ICPAS, came to me and said, oh, Prof, we might be able to do something. That's the goal. And we started out in 2008 trying to build this data set, and hopefully, within 10 years, we have a rich enough data set for us to do interesting thing and really study corporate Singapore, firm listed in the SGX. So, we don't want to basically cook up something that we can't use and compare across the board. We want something that allows us to compare. We can't be in isolation and decided to put up our own rules. I mean, if you look at some of the research done in corporate governance, they pull out some data set like, managerial ownership. Somebody put up this idea that, if a manager owns more of the company share, maybe there's an alignment, right, of incentives. Okay? So if a manager don't own any of the company share but runs the company, then there's a problem. Somebody put up the money, you are running it, and you don't own any part of the company, so there's a problem. But what happens if the manager owns too much of the company share, to the tune of, let's say, 50.01%, right? Then you have a problem too. Right? As a minority shareholder, right? Every time, let's say somebody came and offer a company a lot of money, we're going to buy over your company, but the manager doesn't want to lose control, blocked it because I have over 50%. Okay, so it's really tricky, the calibration as to where is the optimal managerial ownership. So that could be one of the variable, and that variable is used a lot in corporate governance study. So they collected that one variable and they do that. But that's not the purpose of what we are trying to do here. Remember, we are Center for Corporate and Investors Responsibility. So there are two things that's important to the center. One is on the corporate responsibility, and the other one is investor responsibility. Okay, on the corporate side, we want to put together a depository, a database to allow researcher, whether graduate students or industry player, to tap into our database and ask questions. And if there are questions that, well, that's a great question, but we can't answer because we don't have the data, we'll collect it next year. Well, we are collecting the data. On the investor's responsibility side, it's so easy. In Singapore, you can't just go out and scream and yell, but you can go to speaker's corner. Yeah? You can go to speaker's corner and start saying, oh, I put my money in this instrument and it went south and somebody cheated me. Right? That's not good either, because investor has to be responsible. So one of the things that we do in the center is to embark on financial literacy programs. So we are doing interesting stuff in the center. So on one hand, we have corporate responsibility, trying to get the corporate to play fair, play well. But on the other side, the investors, we are trying to depart enough information, programs, initiatives, and we are working closely with Money Sense and CRs, and City Foundation put up some a grant for us to experiment with this idea of training the trainers. Right? All this is on the two sides. One is corporate responsibility, investors' responsibility. Yeah. So when we collect this data, and Tom pretty much outlined the principle behind, and basically to let you know, right, the outcome. Right? These days it's easier to just tell you the story up front. What's the result? Right? The result is that we find good governance is associated with higher valuation. Now, remember, I use the word association. I don't use the word causality. Good governance is the cause of higher valuation. Not yet. Can't answer that question as of yet, because we don't have enough sample point. It'll be very, very irresponsible of me to say that, this causes that. We don't know. It could be the other way around. It could be that firms that are successful has the resources to do the right thing. Right? So at this point, we can't answer the question because we don't have enough data. That's why I say it's a long-term project. Okay? Once we collect 10 years of data, then we might be able to answer that question. But at this point in time, it is an association. Okay? So don't go away saying that, I say, this causes that. Okay? And we are academic, we are very careful. Right? Okay? We don't overclaim things. As a matter of fact, we tend to underclaim, right? What's going on. Now, so the benchmarking exercise that Tom mentioned is this whole idea of this OECD as the overarching principle. And then we take this principle, we look at the Singapore code, and then we customized it. Because one of the problems with a code like this is that it's not a one-size-fits-all type of a code that you can use and apply to every country. Every country has their own little idiosyncrasies, different legal environment, different things, right? But what's really neat is that if this exercise is done correctly, at least in some sense, we can compare across the board because the principles are the same. So if Tom and I want to get down and actually compare, let's say the best of the best, look at a Singapore firm and look at a Thai firm, and if you get Steve Chong in there, look at the Hong Kong firm, three of us could sit down and take out our scorecard, and we go through, and then we picked out things that are very similar of the top company over there, and we looked at them. I think we should be able to compare, at least for the country that we looked at. Take away some of those idiosyncrasies and measure at the global level. And that's what I'm hoping, Pima and myself will sit down with Steve and figure that thing out. At least then we can do a real comparison. Because if not, it's very difficult. Oftentimes when you compare, firms, I cringe whenever I hear, this country, that country, I mean, overall you can look at the legal environment, but when you start comparing firms, individual company across, let's say you're on the company, the one that won a award in Singapore, or the one that won an award in Thailand, the best of the best, and you compare. It's difficult to compare because you're comparing apples and oranges, right? So one of the things that we worry about, when we're doing academic research is that we have to level the playing field. We have to compare apples to apples and not apples to oranges, okay? And one of the beauty of doing something like this is at the end of the day, when you look at individual company assessment, is that you're able to, zoom in, look at it, and at least give some feedback to the firm, okay? The first year they may not listen. As a matter of fact, P-Mark told me one time, the first time they did it, some managers got really upset with him. Some firms got really upset with him. What do you mean? Second year they are still upset with him. But the third year, I think they saw the light, these are stuff that investors do. If investors take this stuff as important, then, But does it apply to all companies? Nah, I don't think so. Okay. Just imagine if I own a company, a successful idea, I have the patent, the intellectual property, and I own, let's say, 80% of the firm. 20% is floating out there somewhere, right? Then, what is good governance? Good governance is my governance, right? Do I care? I don't care, right? Do I need funding? I don't need funding, right? So I mean, it doesn't apply to everybody, but on average, I guess, like we talk about in academic research, we are looking at the average, right? There are always firms that are 3 standard deviation from the mean, I like to say, right? They're always, on average, we are all around, 5 feet 8, 5 feet 7, but there are some people who are 6 feet 11, right? So these are the extreme, the 3 standard deviation from the mean, right? Okay, so you can't apply this to everybody. Some people just don't care, okay? So it all depends. Now, the 5 principles, I'll elaborate a little bit as to why this stuff is important. You look at rights of shareholders. Okay. If you are investors, with the separation of ownership and management, you're going to put up your money, right? Hard-earned money, you're going to buy SGX stocks, okay? And Magnus Bocker, right, who sits on our Tim Kibun Institute's advisory board. Okay? I always joke that I'm a shareholder, so I'm his boss, okay? But he's the advisory board member, so he's my boss, So, so as a shareholder, right, is my right protected? Okay. See, SGX is a bad example, but maybe a mom and pop company will be a better example. Put up the money and put money in the share, buy shares, and basically what happens, right? What if the managers or the decided to empty the bank account and run away? Are there any recourse, right? Things like that. That's how corporate scandal starts. How can we prevent it? Say, are there any rights, any recourse? And one of the issues that's really important is this idea of enforcement, right? We can put up rules, we can say until the cow come home, but if we don't enforce, nothing's going to happen, right? Students back there are laughing, just like say, I can always say, all these stuff are important. Until I say that's an exam, you guys won't study, right? Okay? So there must be some kind of enforcement, right? Right? But more importantly, I think there also need to be some kind of market discipline, right? Look at motivation. We are all human creatures. We are all motivated. I like to talk about utility function. We all have different utility function. Some people love to golf. Some people love hanging out at the beach, just doing nothing. So we are all motivated differently. But the firm is always motivated by one thing: the need for funds. That's the motivation. If they need to do a project, they need funds. As easy as that. They need to be able to tap the capital market. to raise money. And you see it every day, now and then. Oh, Genting is raising, X dollars in selling perpetual bonds. Okay, XYZ company is issuing shares. Right? They need to tap the capital market. So the capital market is a really good enforcer in some sense, right? A disciplining factor, okay, of the firm. So if we are able to contribute by collecting data and highlighting the rights of the shareholder, U.S. shareholders, what type of rights do you have as far as this company is concerned? I think, over the long run, we are able to do something, right? In the US, it's a different story. In the US, then they have class action suit. They get together and then they sue. Right? And the lawyers are happy. Right? So this is one component. The other component, you have the equitable treatment of shareholders. Are shareholders treated equally? And in this case, there's majority and there's minority. Are there things put in there to balance the field? Right? And then this stuff is, relatively untapped area as of yet. A lot of development in that area, role of stakeholder in corporate governance, and it raises a lot of questions. Whether a firm's sole goal is to maximize profit. You pick up a MBA textbook in corporate finance, the first page, the first line is managers must maximize shareholders' wealth. Right? Okay? MBA 101, right? Oh, and then we always ask that question in the exam. Put in multiple choice, maximize revenue, maximize sales, market share, and then maximize shareholders' wealth. Or if you're already bad, then we say, E, none of the above. F, all of the above. G, 1 and 3. Right? So, I tell you, I set multiple choice questions. They're so tricky that my student protests. Prof, please don't set that more multiple choice questions. Give us essay, we'll write. Right? But here, come back to here. Now this new movement, the whole idea of corporate social responsibility. Okay, is this something that's important? Okay, are we really, producing our goods and services without caring about the environment? Has come to the forefront since Al Gore, went out and talked about, carbon footing and about carbon emission that we are throwing up in the atmosphere, right? So making the movie. Now, so this stuff is relatively new, and will show that a lot of times, in our results, we find some really interesting correlation when we just look at that component. And what is looked at a lot in corporate governance research is basically these two things: disclosure and transparency. The basic tenet of accounting research. If you look at a lot of the accounting research, paper published in the Journal of Accounting and Economics and Accounting Review, a lot of the paper is about disclosure, voluntary disclosure, things like that. Disclosing good news, bad news, So a lot of research has been done on disclosure and transparency in the accounting literature. And so this sector is looked a lot. And then responsibility of the board also. Whether you're a management faculty doing research, or you're a finance professor doing research, or accounting, or law, or economics, a lot of focus on measuring board effectiveness. And measuring board effectiveness is very difficult. How do you even begin to say, comparing A and B, two groups of people, and figure out which group is more effective? Very difficult. Not impossible, but difficult. Okay? So hopefully, people like Prof. Gosh, in my team, right, will take out the big guns, and figure out all sorts of econometrics to I call it my magic whip. Talk data talk, whip the data till the data talk, right? We assemble the data and then we start whipping the data. Talk, right? So anyway, so what we are doing here is basically we have these 5 components, right? And remember, collecting data is expensive exercise, okay? Right? And Arnold will be upset, if I tell him I'm going to go asking for more money because I want to go collect more data, you know, right? So we have to collect data, and this data is collected manually. Right? So one thing nice about this, if let's say we are successful enough in doing this, there'll be enough funding available, then we can expand the data set and everybody's happy. Right? But we have to set somewhere. So we start somewhere by looking at these 5 categories, and we start collecting questions, and you look at those weightage of those questions. Okay? So you add them up, and even though they say 10, 5, 8, 10, and 25, that doesn't mean this is it. In those questions, there's a lot of sub-questions. So if we total up all the items that my researcher has to collect, they are collecting, 120 of those data items. And some items are easy. Yes, no. Look at it. Yes. No, it's checking boxes. So it's good or bad? Good and bad. Good is easy. Bad, sometimes it is a box checking exercise. Okay? So if the firm knows that you are doing a box checking exercise, they will put up the box and figure out, what to put in there. So you check. So after a while, what we'll see is that the index will creep, right? Because people learn. Just like if you take your GMAT, right, the first time, and then you go back and take it the second time, okay? Some of those admission office will say, well, we'll just knock off 40 points because there's learning, right? Okay? So anyway, so they'll be learning, like it or not. That's why, an instrument like this, it's not a static instrument, it's a dynamic one. It will evolve over time. Okay? So when we are doing a kind of a longitudinal type of a deal, some of those questions will evolve and will become more sophisticated, So it's almost like a game, okay? Trying to collect the data to elicit this point, whether or not, they are practicing what they say. Okay? They can say they are doing this, but how do we know? Right? So we need to figure things out. And the technology is starting to come up. Okay? Right? We have our living analytics. It still is at its infancy, still very young. The technology is there, but if you think about content analysis, okay? Being able to go onto the web and look at all the information in the public domain, and then come up with a script and crawl the whole internet, whatever information that's out there using keywords, okay, search algorithm, and start searching. It's still very early, but sooner or later, give it another 5 years, we will be able, to get there. Yeah. So we have a big grant, we have a shop over here that are specialists doing that type of research, content analysis, going out there and crawling the net for information, okay? And those information can complement what we are doing over here, okay? So it's evolving, okay, what we are doing. But these are the main, pretty much what we are looking at, so all the different things. For shareholder rights, we are looking for the definition, okay? How do they define it? What are the rights? Okay, can shareholder participate in AGMs? Are there any rules about takeovers? Okay. That's why when you look at the U.S. studies, especially a very, all my students, make them read this paper by Compass, Ishii, and Matrix. Okay. They have this 24 points scale, 24 provision, right? The 24 provision. So they created an index. We call it the Compass Index. But that measure is very different from this index because if you look at corporate governance in this region versus corporate governance in the U.S. Okay, if you look at corporate governance in the U.S., that's why I say it cannot be one size fit all, because in the U.S. there is a very active litigation market, takeover market, right? So a lot of this corporate governance indices that were developed in the U.S. is basically more external, looking at probability of takeover, right? If manager doesn't behave, right, the value of the firm dropped, corporate raiders comes in, raid the firm, and get rid of, replace all the management, right? But we don't see this type of thing happening around here. So you need a different type of a measure. You need more internal measure, which is what we are doing over here. Right? Because the Gompers, Ishii, and Matrix measure is really an outside measure, measuring the provision, whether is there a golden parachute, whether is there a poison pill, okay, right? Are the board staggered, okay? So they have 24 of those items, and they used to joke, if a firm has a Gompers index of 24, you can't even fire the manager, okay? Right? And somebody cooked it up, said, "No, 24 doesn't work. All we need is 6." So Bad Check Cohen came up with 6 of those 24 and say, "See, with these 6, I can predict whether the managers are entrenched or not entrenched." Okay? And this notion of entrenched manager is a bad idea. Okay? So there's a lot of research going on in the U.S. But remember, if you are reading those papers of corporate governance in the U.S., right, they are mainly external, looking at takeover rather than what we are doing here. What we are doing here is measuring the practices internally. Okay, what's put in place. Okay, so we have all these 5 components, and I think this is some of Tom's work. If you look at Thailand, Korea, okay, you see China and Hong Kong, you pretty much see the same pattern. There's some correlation between performance as measured by Tobin's Q, market value, you name it. But the whole idea is that there's economic value. There's a correlation between economic value and good governance. Okay? Which one comes first, we don't know. Not yet. Okay? But at least there is a correlation. Okay? So if you put your money in firms that tends to have better corporate governance practices, at least you're getting your money's worth because valuation tends to be high. Okay? And they basically support this idea, that McKinsey and company did a survey asking a question. If you have 2 identical companies doing the same thing, okay, making and delivering pizza, let's say, right, and they're looking for investors, and company A basically have very good governance, the rights are protected, they disclose a lot of things, right, and the board looks pretty decent, look like they are really good people, right? And they ask the question, and the other one is basically run by somebody with no disclosure, no nothing. How much are you willing to pay? What are premium you are willing to pay? And the McKinsey type survey said that investors are willing to pay more. Okay? So what they found in China, in Hong Kong, in Korea, in Thailand pretty much support this idea that people are willing to pay more. Okay? Right? There seems to be a correlation. Now, then what we need to do, the next step, is to look at our scorecard, and then we look at the Singapore Code. Remember, you can't just take, what is this overarching principle that's developed for globally and just apply without thinking. So we have to make sure what is consistent with the Singapore Code, and we can say that we're pretty comfortable that we cover pretty much, a good portion of it. Yeah. So can we cover all? Yeah, definitely. Why not? Right? But it takes resources. Okay? Right? So there's always a trade-off of what resources you have at your disposal and how much data you want to collect. Okay? And to the best of our ability, we just collect everything. So there seems to be a lot of coverage of the Singapore Code. So we are very comfortable. So, I just look at our scorecard compared to the Singapore Code, and I think you see that a lot of these things are being taken care of. Okay? Now, what is the advantage? Tom mentioned some of the advantages already. But the big one, as far as science or rigor is concerned, is this: selection bias. Okay? If you are doing a piece of research, selection bias is one of the biggest problems. Are you selecting a sample, putting together a sample, and that's flawed, that's biased? Okay? I can show you papers after papers, even published in the Journal of Finance, okay, that basically suffer from sample selection biases. When you fix the bias, suddenly the result went away. Okay? I had a personal experience back when I was a graduate student, trying to do a study, and my thesis advisor said, you're getting it wrong. And finally, the paper came out in the Journal of Financial Economics. I said, I see. He's still not convinced it is wrong. It turns out it is wrong because there's a sample selection bias, even for a paper that's published in the Journal of Financial Economics. Okay? So here, what we try to do, we don't want biases, because when you send out survey to the firm, first, the response rate is very low. If you are doing survey, you know. Okay? And we have the experience. I think at SIAS, right? Send out survey, have kind of knock on their door, call them up and say, please respond. Right? Please respond, right? So normally you send out 100 survey, you get 10 back. I think the 10% rate is pretty good, right? Okay. So you want 100, right? You better send out 1,000. Okay. So you want 1,000, you send out 10,000. Okay. That seems to be the norm. But here we don't have to do this because I used to say that we are doing it the bread talk way. You just put the thing in front. We'll show people you want to do it, you can do it. Anybody can go out and put together this database. It's just time consuming, okay? At the end of the day, you have to be committed, with this project to just have this depository, okay? Collecting 1 year is not useful to people. 2 years is not useful. 3 years, by the time you collect 10 years, suddenly it becomes useful, yeah? And if you collect 20 years of data, then it's a treasure, okay? Right? So when I'm gone, I'm no longer here, I'm retired, fishing out fishing on the boat. I think this database that I put together will be very valuable. Just like Van Gogh and his painting, Same thing, same idea. But the whole idea is that you got to start somewhere. Okay? So hopefully this one of the thing that I'll start and it'll just continue building. And this data set will get bigger and bigger and bigger. Okay? So selection bias, okay? This is one of the most important things as far as I'm concerned. So I don't want to go talk to the firm. I don't want to go and write to them or anything. I just go get all the information in the public domain. So when our living analytics people finesse their data mining, okay? Mine the data, we will use some of those things that are available there to add on to what we are doing. Okay. Now, when we looked at our score based on our, again, I don't like, this is not a finger pointing exercise, so you will never find me releasing individual scores, okay? I won't even tell you, about who comes first, okay? I put them in alphabetical order, okay? Some firms that get a score of, 88, another one got a score of 88.1, right? You guys are students, right? Is there any significant difference between 88 and 88.1? So I think it's better to lump them as a category rather than individual scores, okay? Because the marginal difference, may not be statistically different. So if you look at last year, these are firms that basically did very well, okay? The Cerebos, the CDLs, Comfort Delcro, our taxi, even David will beg to defer this morning. He couldn't get a cab, to come down here, right? Yeah. Keppel Land, SBS Transit, Soundcorp, whatnot, right? SMRT, even though, some people will beg to defer, right? After being stuck in there. But basically, this is what they have been put in place, okay? Right? And no bonus, no penalty, stuff like that. Because we just want to be unbiased, that's all. Okay? So if the biases creeps in, it will be across the board, right? And because of that, it kind of cancels it out. It won't be arbitrarily, doing things like that. Right? Now, breakdown. Okay? So I won't bore you with the finer detail of all these rights. Okay? They're all in the OECD principle. You can read them if you're interested. Okay, but the whole idea here is that basically the framework should protect and facilitate the exercise of shareholder rights. And then how do we figure out, questions to ask, boxes to tick, and decisions to be made as to whether or not they are good or not so good practices. Right? Those are the implementation, and Pima and myself, we try to be consistent with each other when we are doing this. So at least we are not reinventing the wheel. Okay, and same thing for equitable treatment of shareholders. Okay, right? All shareholders should have the opportunity to obtain effective redress for violation of their rights. Right? That's in the recommendation. So the firm has anything in there to address this. Right? Role of stakeholder, like I said, okay? Do they care about the environment? Okay? Do they care about their suppliers? Do they care about their customers? Things like that. Okay? And that's why I did not say, disclosure and transparency pretty straightforward. Okay? Board responsibility also pretty straightforward. Because the board has two roles, like I said, right? One is to monitor, one is to offer strategic advice. Okay, are they doing their job? Okay? Some boards are better in monitoring, other boards are better in giving advice, right? See? That's why I say it's very difficult to measure what really is effective board, because maybe for a mature company, right, what they need is good monitoring. For a growing company, maybe what they really need is strategic advice. So it's very hard to say, what constitutes effective board, right? Because it can be very different. You can't have one size fit all because of the duality of the role. Okay, one is to give advice, the other one is to monitor, right? But we try. So we collect a lot of data. We collect everything that's listed in the main board, and also the to the best of our ability, the smaller one. And then we collected so far from 2007. The 2007 was the pilot study collected by the graduate student, right? When we did the pilot study. But now we have collected 2007, 8, 9, and 10, 4 years of data, okay? And then we put them, we scored them, okay? We did some, and we forced them into this distribution, okay? Some linear transformation to get them down to 100. And you guys have taken class before, right? Different components, but at the end of the day, everything is measured at 100%, right? So when we put together our score, the scorecard, and then we look at the distribution, and when we look at this frequency distribution, we end up with something like this. If you are an econometrician, Gosh looks at something like this, and Gosh will start smiling, okay? Because it looks pretty well behaved, right? Okay, I mean, you guys are all students. You know the famous bell-shaped curve, right? Okay, when we do an exam, when we get an exam, when it comes back and we get a distribution that looks like this, I say, yeah, I think that's a good exam, right? And if we get like 2 spikes here and nothing in the middle, we know that there's something wrong with this exam, right? So when we see a bell-shaped curve like this, we are pretty encouraged. Put it this way, right? As a statistician, we are encouraged, and then we look at the mean, the median, and standard deviation and everything, and say, wow, it's pretty well behaved, okay? And then we look at basically the numbers, and if you look at the numbers, the overall index, the mean is 62.33, median is 62.36, right? And when the mean and the median are pretty close together, you know that they are pretty well behaved. There's no outliers. Okay, the 3 standard deviation from the mean problem is being minimized. Okay, and then we break it up into the rights, okay, of shareholders, the treatment A, B, C, D, and E. And then you look at, you start to see some variation, and there will be variation. Okay, and then if you break them by industry, and then you see some industry score better than other industry, and also this is pretty common. Okay, right? If there's more mom and pop company in the industry, guess what? Their score will be lower. Okay? My grandfather is still alive today, running his company. There won't be any, best practices. The best practice is his practice. But that's my grandfather. Right? So. Now, once we have all this data, we need to make sense out of this data, okay? And one of the most important things is to be able to run a regression, okay? But before we run the regression, we basically look at the univariate. Univariate is simply, I take Tobin's Q, right, which is a measure of the economic performance of the firm. There's accounting performance, and then there's economic performance. They are quite separate, okay? One is the ROA, the return on asset. That's what the accounting report, okay? But Tobin's Q is basically market value. That's what the market says. Okay, you sum up all the shares, multiply by the value, the share price, you get your market valuation, and take that market valuation divided by the book. That is a good proxy for what Tobin's call it the Q ratio. So it's an economic measure as opposed to a accounting measure. Okay. Now, if you look at the economic measure, when we started in 2007, it looked pretty well behaved. The high scoring one does well. The not so high scoring one don't do that well. And then in 2008, they kind of varies a little bit. But overall, as we collect more and more data, we are starting to see a very nice picture developing that the high score one tends to do better than the low scoring one. Okay. Right. First year we did this, we're all so happy. It's so nicely behaved. Then the second year, saying, well, is there something wrong? Okay. Then the third year, fourth year, third year and fourth year, now we are pretty confident. So as we have more and more data, our comfort level becomes higher and higher because we can do more things. Okay, we have more data points. Now this is an important table because this pretty much put everything in, right? And we look at whether or not the dependent variable is the economic measure, performance, right? And then we want to ask this question whether or not there is some kind of relationship between the index, the measure that we put in, okay, and its correlation with the firm valuation. Okay, but we also have to level the playing field because you say, well, Prof, Singtel has more resources than maybe Jianhu, right, or any other company, right? Okay, so it's not a level playing field. So we have to put in total asset, some current ratio, we have to cover leverage. Then we have to put in some individual characteristics to make sure that we control for everything that past literature say that's important governance measure. So we level the playing field and we look at the top row and we notice every time, regardless of what we do over here, that guy up there stays significant. So it's very encouraging that this relationship stays. We did it for 2007, it was like that, 8, 9, 10, yeah, and the relationship keep getting stronger. So we are very encouraged. See, also the data tells us this duality thing. Okay? There's a minus in the coefficient telling us that duality is no good, right? We don't really know investors or the economic performance is measured by Tobin's Q relating to that this duality somehow is negatively correlated with performance. Okay, another idea that they used to say, there are things that we like and the things we don't like. We don't like this duality problem, and then it pan out in the research also. Okay, and then when we subdivide them to see what is important, right? It turns out that rights of shareholder is very important. Okay, right? And then role of stakeholder, and this one mainly is voluntary. The firm volunteer whether they want to do better in this. Okay, there's no compliance, but disclosure and responsibility, these are mainly compliance. Okay, so when the rules are there, you have to comply, But I guess rights of shareholders and role of stakeholder in corporate governance are one of those things that you need not comply. Okay, but it will be nice, they are doing something nice for their investors, and it pops out right here. Okay. So it's very encouraging to see results like this, especially for that too. And I can explain, this too easily because these are all compliance, okay, mainly, right? And then if we do some kind of a check to say, okay, we have economic performance, let's look at the accounting performance. And the accounting performance is even better. The relationship is even better because you look at the high scoring one, the low scoring one, you look at all the years. Except this year, okay, that there tend to be some relationship, overall relationship where the high scoring portfolio of company comparing to the not so well performing one, they tend to have higher ROA. Okay. Okay, you can use ROA, you can use EBITDA divided by total asset, any kind of accounting measures to measure this. Okay, so anyway, so basically, we have this database, and graduate students, industry players, we are all welcome to talk to us and give us your questions, and then we can try to answer people's questions to the best of our ability with our data. Okay, thank you very much.
So we can open the floor up for maybe a couple of quick questions. It's between lunch and questions.
Standing between you guys and lunch.
Just one question.
Yes.
So one of our biggest problems currently with the listed companies in Singapore is that the controlling shareholders may be resident in a jurisdiction where the regulators cannot bring them back. There is no extradition arrangement, and particularly so in the case of China. This seems to be a major problem. I don't know whether you are aware of any studies which sort of compare the performance of companies where the controlling shareholder is resident in a jurisdiction where there is no extradition arrangements, and as compared with a company where the controlling shareholder is resident within jurisdiction or resident within a country where Singapore has an extradition arrangement.
No, I don't think that, I'm not aware of any studies
Because
like
it's a
that.
major
Yeah, if it's a major problem, it's something that is very important. I think, let me look at my manager over here. We have the data, right? We do have when we construct this thing, one of those things that we construct that took a lot of effort is that plumbing that you saw when Tom showed you that Samsung who owns what. Okay? We collect the data. Next time I borrow your plumbing thing, and we try to figure out who owns this company. So we have that data, and then if that study is important, I think.
Because if it's important, then one of the policy recommendations to the government is that we really must have an extradition arrangement with China. Apparently, they have 23 extradition treaties, even in advanced jurisdictions like France, Australia, and even so apparently there's some lack of thinking in Singapore as to why we don't want an extradition treaty with China. Because if we don't have an extradition treaty with China, I think the airships, the market is going to be dead. Because they ask, to be honest, the controlling shareholders ask us for advice, and they be brought to justice in Singapore. And of course, as good legal advisors, we give them the correct legal advice. So they know, and they don't come to jurisdiction, and they then do these things.
I guess that would be a good thing to look at. Yes.
It takes two to clap, and China is not coming to party yet. I've seen the Chinese authorities here after Sino-Environment, and I think it is not as easy as we think that Singapore can enter into extradition treaty. It takes both countries to accept that there are difficulties, and CIAS is pushing for this, but it will take time.
I just would like to ask.
Actually, identify yourself just for the participants as well.
Okay, I'm Joseph from CIAS. So my question is relating to your collection of data. So you're saying that you collected mostly from published information.
Yes.
One of the things that I was thinking about is, would that be subject to maybe some kind of, because many of these listed companies have PR companies helping them massage informations or signals that they send out to the public. How would your index compensate for that? I mean, because you said you don't have people going to the listed companies to ask them specific questions. That's one question. Secondly is, I was thinking about, in your computation of your index, how does it take care of the company's way of treating financial transactions? How they handle the money. Is that addressed in the index?
First question, right? As on the PR company massaging data, that is tricky, because past studies has looked at the same thing, right? Firms engage in earnings management. We didn't get Right? It's the same idea pretty much. Right? Amazingly enough, that this type of things, yeah, the investors or the market somehow, okay, if you look at what we have done in the past, is that if they massage the earnings and if it shows up later that they are massaging, they do get punished. Okay, and come back to your question, can we address it? Yes and no, because we are kind of looking at yes and no. Like I said, it's a challenge. The first piece is basically looking at whether or not they say, okay, we are going to do this, right? But whether they do it or they don't, we don't know. See? So we start off by collecting the yes/no first. Okay? Then as it evolves, right? Your point is well taken that we have to not only say look at whether it's yes or no, but yes, are you really doing it? See? So that one we'll figure out a way to. So that's where I think that living analytics comes in. Those things to check, to collaborate on our data set. Yeah. Short of calling them and ask them, are you guys really doing this? Right? And sometimes you call them, they say yes. So what are you going to do? Right? So,
PR company.
So you always got, it's almost like I say, it's almost like CSI, it's like CSI, you have to go and investigate, you guys think you're doing this, are you already doing this? Right? So that's the next, that's the evolution. We see that it's moving that way. Because what we'll see is that as we collect the data, I think the averages will go up. Especially now because it's going to be an award and it's going to be accepted here, then everybody start thinking about, looking at this and say, oh, okay, let's get the PR company and start checking boxes. Let's look at what data they are collecting, right? Okay, and then let's work on that. So you almost have to be one step ahead all the time. So it's evolving, right? So more and more resources need to put in there to be one step ahead of the game, right? And so now that's what I anticipate will happen over the long term. Yeah. Yes.
So, Christopher Chung from CS. Follow-up question about the source data, right, for the scorecard.
Mm-hmm.
It was mentioned in advance that it includes annual reports. Annual reports are year to year quite standard. They have to update. I'd like to know, besides annual reports, to use other information on the public domain, Net,
yes, we look at website,
newspaper reports.
Yeah, we look at, we basically, we got this guy, that before Living Analytics comes out, I've been already doing this. We got this web crawler that's able to program in Java that crawl the net for a keyword. So we look at a lot of things, on top. The annual report basically allows us to check boxes, what they have and what they don't have. But when it comes to making decisions of what they do, we do go to website, web page, and other sources.
As a follow-up question, what's the percentage of the information other than annual report? What's the percentage of all that in your information?
Not sure.
50-50?
No. I think more right at this point, I think more on the annual report. Because a lot of questions seem to be binary. Right? So once it's binary, it's all basically, from there, you're checking boxes. Right? So part of it is checking boxes because, right, like I said, you have to start somewhere. You start with checking boxes first. Then after certain thing, the most complicated one, I think, is the ownership data. Ownership data, related to party transactions and all this. Those are difficult. Yeah. Okay. He's actually shaking his head. Yeah. It's a nightmare, huh? Okay.
Yeah. Thank you so much. So let